Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you record from?
No, I have to record from here.
Okay.
No, I can't from here now.
Is it unmuted?
It should be.
From here.
Can y'all hear me? In Zoom.
You can do it from here.
Is that a yes or
Do
no?
more. Yeah, they said yes.
All right, perfect. Okay, I'm gonna start when everything
Yeah,
else is
okay.
situated.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Good?
Yeah.
Alrighty, let's get started. Okay, so welcome to DTE Research Workshop. Alright. Now, for the show of hands, how many people have heard of a literature review or done a literature review in their lives? Perfect. So, yeah, why are you? Oh, yeah, maybe you guys. Yeah. All right. Next one.
Why?
Okay, so a lot of people probably know about the research pyramid or haven't heard of it, but research is huge, right? So you start off with, editorials, expert opinions, right? And then you go up to something known as a systematic review or a meta-analysis, right? So systematic reviews and meta-analyses are basically collections of literature reviews that provide you a conclusion about a specific topic, right? And that's basically, and the fundamental stuff or the unique thing about all of these things is that a literature review is at the basis of everything. So that's why we're here today, so we can learn how to make one, learn how to. Alrighty, so you guys probably already know this, but a literature review is basically a systematic or evidence-based analysis of the literature in an area. So, and specifically from published books, right? So things that are reputable from a scientific perspective. Informally, you can consider any sort of synthesis and review of literature as a literature review. So at this point, at least all of you have done it for probably a class, a poster, or any paper that you've done. Probably IB, AP, whatever you've done in your class, right? Okay, these are the fields, right? It's extremely vast. A lot of these literature reviews, specifically systematic reviews, are reviewed in Congress, and doctors use them because doctors don't have time to read the 4 published articles that come out every second, so they have to read systematic reviews and meta-analyses to basically give them an overview of what's going on in their specific field, right? And these are all the fields that use it. It's quite expansive, so it's really important for almost every field. Alrighty, so the importance is you basically want to know what it states, like what's the current state of the industry or like the topic that you're doing. The second is it provides scope. So if you do a literature review, it tells you what's missing and what's there. So if you are an engineer like yourselves, you can basically focus on the stuff that's not there, and then you can make something that addresses that lack of scope, right? It gives you a framework for research. So it gives you background, contextualizes a lot of things that you're trying to investigate, and maybe if you do a literature review, it eliminates a lot of the research questions that are already saturated with it. So you can actually investigate something pretty novel. And yeah, duplication of efforts, and also it strengthens the credibility of research. This basically means that like you've done the due diligence of looking through multiple articles that have been published, and you're providing that so that you can provide something more novel. That's effectively what it does. Alrighty, so this is step 1, defining a good research question. So whenever you want to conduct anything, you want to have a question, right? And within that question, there's a science to it. That question dictates your inclusion and exclusion criteria. So does anyone know what inclusion and exclusion criteria is? No one. Alrighty. Inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria is effectively the same thing. Like they're effectively exactly as they sound, right? So they're criteria that you use to include something within your study and also exclude. So let's all right, so let's look at this research question, right? Obviously, there's a good one and a bad one. A lot of specificity matters, right? Specificity matters because of inclusion and exclusion criteria. So, for example, the project that we're doing with cardiothoracic research, our research question is, do 3D printed models reduce preoperative anxiety within children, right? Does the usage of a 3D printed model, So in this case, looking at that question, what is the inclusion criteria that you guys can come up with? Grace.
The age range of the children.
Right, okay. What else? There's something else. Right, but what type? I mean, yeah, but like what type of anxiety? Preoperative, postoperative, like, there we go. All right, so those are two things that you're including that must be included in the study. So when you're reading through literature for a literature review and you do not see those two things, those articles are immediately excluded. Right? So exclusion criteria would be age range that's not a kid. And also that kind of makes sense, right? Because you can't generalize anxiety from an adult to a child. Right? Makes sense? It's very simple at the end of the day. Your research question dictates what you can include. So I'll give a personal example from my time when I was running systematic review. Our research question had to deal with transition age youth and the correlation with autism, right? And this was done through, I had to read 8,000 abstracts with 8,000 titles. A lot of the easiest things to do for inclusion and exclusion criteria is look at the title. The title tells you a lot. If the title says, yeah, it deals with adults, I can eliminate it immediately. And after that, you can basically sift through, I think we sifted through 7,000 articles that way. To get through the next 11,000, we had to look at the specific types of autism that were involved. And then we were able to get down to 13. So think of it as like you're filtering it down so that you can make the specific use case for that question. That's why your research question must be specific. And also in terms of in the general expanse of research, if you do not have a specific research question, you don't have a proper investigation. Because I'm pretty sure from a general standpoint, they've come up with stuff, right? Like they've already come up with the majority of the generic stuff, and most of the research being done now is on the edge. So you have to think of things that are very unique and very specific. Alrighty, so how do we search for relevant sources? So, I mean, honestly, you can do a Google search, but if you want to be more formal about this, and if you want to, create a proposed methodology for your literature review, you start with databases, right? So these databases are called Cinehall, Embase, the NIH database, the PubMed database. If you're a CS guy, you can basically create a program that accesses their public APIs, and then you can get the articles on your own. So that's like pretty cool. And if you want to take it a bit further, you can use an LLM to interpret those articles, and then you can basically create a conclusion or like find key points and whatnot. But that's the basic gist. You need to use credible databases that have multiple peer-reviewed sources. These are these databases that I'm talking about. And all of them have a lot, and then there's something called Crossref, which is like a very massive, expensive collection of multiple published sources. And these are really important because when you're creating a methodology, you write down the journal that you use, write down the amount of articles that you used, and then you write down the amount of articles you sifted, and you create a nice flowchart. Alrighty, so as I explained, inclusion and exclusion criteria are essentially exactly what they sound like, right? So, I mean, yeah, there's nothing much. Okay, cool. So let's look at this, right? So suppose my research question has to deal with the development of autism spectrum disorder within adults, right? And I was considering these two articles. Which article would I choose, left or right? Someone said, right, there we go. Perfect. All right. So the protocol for finding relative sources, that's fine. Now, let's talk about reading articles. Who here has tried to read a scientific article and has almost fallen asleep? Good. You're not supposed to read the entire article unless you're a PhD candidate. If you're like us and we're trying to do research with it, you're supposed to read the title, the abstract, the discussion, the results, and the conclusion. And if you want to go even more nitty-gritty in it, you can possibly start reading the way that they did the statistical analyses, what sample size they used, what did they use to process that data, and that will tell you a lot about the paper. All right, so when you do that, you have to do it for a class of papers. And then, you don't want to basically have multiple categories within your literature review, so you use something called chunking, right? There's a method for chunking. I call it the BOSS method. It's simply build your own solution. If you've taken a standardized test and you've taken some coaching with it, or you've like gone on YouTube, they talk about formulating your own answer to the question before attempting it. That's essentially what we're doing for the literature. So for example, let's go back to the cardiothoracic research question, right? Let's say that, okay, so you're using 3D printed models to reduce preoperative anxiety within children, right? So what are some things that we should talk about when discussing this question? And my team, don't answer, please. Like what could give context to the question?
Oh, I mean, they're writing like, I mean, pre-existence could be modeling the reduce anxiety, children, like that.
All right, there we go. So using 3D printed models to supplement the learning, right?
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Okay, that's one. Number two, we can do a category on preoperative anxiety itself. How does it impact patient outcomes? Why is this important, right? So from a generic standpoint, if you're taking a psychology class or you just understand like how things work, you can think that since anxiety is correlated to negative patient outcomes, right? So that's why we're trying to reduce it. That gives that context. What's the third thing that you guys would think? And just spit it out there. It could be anything. What is something that can give context to this project? All right, so let's start. Okay, let's start thinking about it a bit. Let's go deep. Let's go down deeper. We're creating a 3D model, 3D model card to basically supplement the instruction, correct? So what we can also do is we can basically look at the education given to children pre-surgery and see the effectiveness on that and the different types of protocols, because that's what we're trying to suggest, right? So in fact, that's what you have to do. You create these categories, you create these things that you want to answer, you want to contextualize, and then you start finding these sources that support what you need, right? So that's essentially it. You come up with categories, and then now when you're reading the journal, you read the discussion, you read whatever I told you to read, and then you create key points. You can create a 20-word summary, you can do whatever you need to do, but you create key points. And then you find which each key point lines up with each other, which key points amplify each other, enhance each other's argument, and then those are your groups. So that's essentially what a literature, like that's how you do chunking in a literature. That's how effective it is.
You want me to move on? Okay.
Sorry. Okay. All right, so as I said, evaluating sources. So you evaluate sources through something called bias elimination, and that's something like a lot high level. So I'll just like give you the bare bones of it. You look at the sample size, right? If the sample size is not a good sample size, and how do we know it's not a good sample size, right? If it's low, it's not correlated to good data. And if it's high, it is correlated to the robustness of the data, right? And then on top of that, you can read the if they cited someone, you can see what type of statistical test they use. Like if it's an observational study versus like an experimental study, right? What can we what's the negatives of observational studies? Does anyone know? Bias, right? Because someone's observing, right? Someone has a perspective on it. What does an experimental study try to do? It tries to eliminate bias through randomization, right? So that's how we look at things. We want to look at the study design of the paper, and then we try to eliminate the things that are causing bias. And those are your best papers. That's what you could do. And when you go to a meta-analysis and when you go to a systematic review level, there are 27 steps involved with doing 26 to 27 steps involved with doing a Prisma analysis. And that is essentially trying to eliminate the most amount of bias possible because you're trying to provide conclusions within an area. So as from a very bare bones structure, look at the study design, use your basic science knowledge to understand like, okay, this is observational, it's not that good. Does this have a high internal validity, external validity? You have to look at all that type of stuff to basically include or use this within your paper. And it helps because it makes your paper a lot stronger since you're using better sources. Like I said, size of data set, types of test, observation is not cool. I don't like observational studies because like from a moment, there's no like experimentation on it. It's just you're looking at phenomenon. And you want to identify biases. So like specifically about biases, you want to look at what type of populations are they confronting, right? So from an anxiety perspective and from a health perspective, if you've taken a health disparity scores, you could see that there are certain types of races that are predisposed to experiencing more anxiety than others, correct? Which means that if they're only focusing on a middle-aged, white, high, like, not high poverty, but like middle-class people, you can also tell that that is an inherent bias within the study. Because you have a diverse class of patients and you want to basically show that this finding that you're trying to, report on is expandable to every bit of the population, right? All right, now can you click that link?
I don't know if it's clickable. It's of, Hold up.
It's okay.
you sure?
I mean, it's just reading an article. What time are we on?
6:53.
Yeah, we'll skip it.
Okay.
Okay, so step 4, analyze and synthesize. So when you're actually writing, a lot of mistakes that you see in initial literature reviews is that you just describe what the article's talking about. That's not synthesizing, right? Like that's basically you writing a mini summary. People don't want to see that. When you're writing a literature review, you're advancing an argument that you're putting in your paper, right? So anyone who's taken AP Lit or AP Lang, you know that there's something called the ICE method. It's called the introduce, cite, explain, elaborate method. You do not use the citation because citations are usually parenthetical in papers, right? But you want to introduce the thing that you're talking about, you want to explain what you're talking about, and then you want to elaborate further on the significance of what you're talking about. And that's how you do it. And you do that in 1 to 2 sentences, you've done a proper synthesis. That's how you write a literature review. It's very robotic when you get to like the higher levels. You want to just use 2 sentences, advance your argument, and you can even group sources together if they're talking about similar things, right? Like it's all about being all encompassing and representative of what you're reading and what you've analyzed. Right, so that's an example, and honestly, it's not that good of an example because there's some description on it, but we use a class of papers, and this is the basic review of like this is a basic look at a literature analysis of what a category could look like. We use 40 sources. This is one of the categories. I'll post it in the channel so that you guys can look at later. Okay. Alrighty. Step 5, organizing the findings. So this is where a lot of the AP Lang / like writing flow comes into. If you're trying to advance an argument, you want to set the background for it, then have like some sort of have contextualization, then talk about what you want to talk about, and then like end off on a really good note. Flow matters because in a lot of these papers, specifically for peer-reviewed papers, they knock off points for flow, and they also not knock off points, but they just send your paper back. You won't get published, right? They knock off points for flow. They basically say like, oh, this is not grammatically correct. This is not grammatically correct. So like you want to make it as concise and as much of a flowing argument as possible. So that's why this is very important. And if you guys have taken APUSH or AP World, you guys probably remember how to do BBQ sourcing, or you've probably forgotten the PTSD from it. So essentially, it's basically finding your chunks and categories and then placing them in a way that builds up your argument for the rest of the paper, right? So that's how the best way to put it. All right, now can you pull up the APUSH tool?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so unfortunately, I will be re-traumatizing all of you, and we'll be doing AP US History DBQs.
I feel like I just,
What's in this one?
here we go.
All right.
Why isn't it sharing there? Oh my goodness. Sorry guys, 2 seconds.
Definitely will do.
Let's see if it's.
So does anyone have any questions so far?
There we go.
And see how they're quite differently.
How have I managed that? I haven't really given them the liberty much. But generally speaking, when you're talking from a team perspective, whenever you're writing, you delegate tasks, and I have done that, but my job is to edit and make everything work right. So if that requires me to basically cut up what my teammates have wrote, I will do that because at the end of the day, the flow matters the most. So like they have their opinions there, they write, they do whatever they want, and then I try to accommodate as much as possible so that it can be public, if that makes sense. Okay, so let's look at this.
Can you guys all see it? Is it like legible? Yeah, okay.
Let's look at this. Right. Actually, let's look at the question first. Go on. Yeah, so explain the reasons why new conservatism rose in prominence in the United States between 1960 and 1980. Right. Let's not think about the background of this, right? Let's just analyze these documents, right? Okay. So when you look at this, right, can someone in the audience give me like an example or like a gist of what this is trying to show? Got it.
I mean, it's showing like statistics that give evidence for like why people might have been switching to that mindset to do like unemployment. Switching.
Right, okay, so what specifically is it telling us?
I guess it's telling us that like increased unemployment rates and inflation are leading. I don't know what this is honestly.
I mean, you're right, so, I mean, if you just look at this, right? Jimmy Carter was Democrat, right? Unemployment, inflation, very high. And then, you know, when Ronald Reagan came in, Ronald Reagan brought it down. So that's what we can write as our gist. Main point, this is showing that Republicans basically stabilized the economy. Is that something that we can all agree on for this document? Got it. Okay, so what's it say? All right, let's read this. Okay. Franklin Roosevelt's rapid conversion from constitutionalism to doctrine, blah, blah. Okay, so can anyone give me a gist for this document? Obviously. Basically, they're saying that because Franklin Delano Roosevelt effectively tried to stipulate, try to centralize the government a lot, it ruined the economic foundation of the country. And this is another way of like saying that the Democrats were not good economically, but Republicans ushered in good economic intentions. So just now, between document one and the graph, do the document one and graph go together? Yes. So what is that called? A group, right? So good document two. All right. Okay, so this is another way of, this is another economic document, right? Where they're basically saying that, what's it called? It was because of small market and free market capitalism that the US has been able to prosper. And if you look at the era beforehand, FDR had the big New Deal, and the big New Deal was extreme government amount of spending, and there was a lot of centralization. So this document is arguing against it. So can we group the graph document 1 and 2 in the same group? Yes. And that's basically what I'm trying to do. And that's basically what you would think. We're not going to go through this entire thing. I just wanted to show like that's how you want to read specific things. You want to create a gist, and if the gists line up, create a group. And you can do that with the rest of this document, but I'm not really going to do that because we have a limited time. But that's basically the gist. You want to be able to group specific literature together so that you can create a category for your literature review. You find a lot of literature that supports that category, and then you synthesize it into a very nice argument, which then, gives you a good background on what you're trying to do. So, yeah.
How do you track all the literature that you group together?
So I mean, I do it very archaically. I have my iPad and I do highlights and write notes on all that. And I have a folder, but what you could do is you can use Zotero. Zotero is very nice. You can use any basic citation software and within the citation software, they have something called an annotated bibliography. That's where you can write your little gist if you wanted to. But if you want to do this professionally in the future, Zotero is your best thing to do. Zotero is probably the most used tool, free citation tool by every researcher. It allows you to create cards, and those cards allow you can categorize those cards, and when you're writing, you just put it in and just. So it's like pretty cool. And you can use Excel, basically whatever documentation technique works for you, use it. But if you want to do it more professionally, Zotero is like really built for that. So that's how I would say you can go about it.
So Zotero is also really good for collaboration. Like you can share documents between people in like a lab group. There's also Mendeley. Mendeley is another really good software. I like that one personally, but it's less good for like collaboration. But yeah.
Yeah, that's basically it.
Do you want me to go back to the PowerPoint?
Oh yeah, I mean I think that's it.
Is that it?
Yeah, we're done.
Okay, Shreya?
All right.
Why?
Alrighty, so now we're going to talk about IRBs. So once you've done the literature review, once you know you have an idea, you have a solid idea, you have something and you want to, and it involves people, then you'll do an IRB. So what exactly is an IRB? So IRB stands for Institutional Review Board. So they're a board of people that review all research studies that are going on. They basically protect the rights of research, of like the research subjects, research participants. So they ensure, ethical standards are met, everything is, you're doing everything ethically and right and nothing. Also, I forgot to mention this, but if you have any questions, feel free to shout out or raise your hand. But yeah, so they essentially just make sure that everything is going right. So, so every university has an IRB board and everyone, offers these 3 types of IRBs. So the first one is IRB 1. So that's more for research studies that are focused on medical and health related research. IRB 2 is for non-medical research, and then a Western IRB is more broad. It's more, it's just more broad. So we can move on. So here's the website for the Institutional Review Board. Also, so I shared this PowerPoint. All these, all the things that are underlined, they're like websites, like they're linked, so you can press on them and go on it. But that's just basically what the website looks like. So getting started. So first you want to register with my IRB. And you can only do it on campus, or you have to use a VPN. But the IRB website is really great because they have a lot of resources to make the process really easy. So there's also like a researcher manual, and also you have to do required training. So there's an IRB 803 training, and then depending on like who your study sponsor is, you might have to do good clinical practice or HIPAA training. So what exactly can you do as an undergrad in terms of IRB studies? So this graph is really nice because it shows you exactly what you can do. So you can access EMR, electronic medical records, you can access data, obtain consent, but obviously you can't be the PI. But like for example, medical students could be the PI. It also depends on the risk. So if it's minimal risk, if it's not like that bad, then a medical student could be the PI, which we do a lot just because like we collaborate with a lot of medical students, so yeah, that'd be the PI. But if it's greater than minimal risk, then they can't. Also adverse events. So adverse events are normally when you're doing the study and like something doesn't go according to protocol, which we'll go over in a moment what a protocol is. But essentially, so the important components of an IRB study. So a detailed research protocol outlining the study's purpose, methodology, and procedures. Because you are doing research on potentially people, whatever, like you have to be very specific about what you're doing because people are volunteering their time like to help with the research. So they want to know exactly what you're doing. So in the protocol, that's when you would outline everything. Informed consent. Informed consent is basically a document that has all of the study information. It's basically the protocol, but in a document that's at a level of an 8th grader. That's what they say specifically, like you can't use any words above like 8th grade level. But it just ensures that the patient understands what they're getting into and that they agree. It's really important because you have to get informed consent before you do anything with a participant. If they don't give you their informed consent, then you can't do anything. They can also revoke their consent at any point. In the IRB study, you also have to do an assessment of the risks and benefits to the participant, so you have to outline everything. Also measures for protecting participant privacy and data confidentiality. So, whether your computers are going to be locked, whether the file cabinets that you're storing the papers or whatever, if it's locked, that sort of things. And then for monitoring the study's conduct to ensure compliance with ethical standards and regulations. So that would be out. So the IRB, they do ensure that you're complying and that you're following the ethical standards and everything. but you also have to get a, safety, monitoring board, and they also, ensure that you're doing everything correctly. Normally for bigger studies, like the NIH does that, so like, because like they're, like if the NIH is your study sponsor, they have their own people, they do that. UF also has like a board for that they do that, so, yeah. So how does the submission process work? So once you have all of the components of your IRB together, then you submit it, and then initially, so an IRB specialist will preview it, will like make sure that, you know, all the T's are crossed and all the I's are dotted. They don't really like, they look more at like, you know, does everything look correct, not like whether it's approved or not. And so if, for example, there is something wrong, then they'll send it back to you. If everything's all good, then it goes for a formal review, either expedited or full board, which we'll go over in a moment. They also will, they might also request clarifications, and then at the end, another IRB specialist will look at it and the review is basically done. It's actually it's a weird, okay, we'll go over this in a moment, but it's funny because like if you do a full board review, like there's like an actual board of people, and like they only meet like 2 times a month. And it's like really weird because like you may or may not get a call that day, and like they might ask you for like clarification, like that's how they do it, like if you need clarification, like they'll call you on the phone and be like, hey, like what did you mean by this? But yeah, it's like really weird, but anyway. So for the research review types, so it depends on the risk of your study. If it's non-human, you're just like looking at samples or data, then you'll do a non-human review. It'll be pretty quick. Exempt review is minimal risk. So like for a lot of our studies that we're doing with Dream Team, it's a lot of like educational settings or like well, we don't have anonymous surveys, but like we're not like giving them a drug or anything, like we mostly give them surveys. So that's exempt. Data or chart review, so if you're like, it's kind of similar to like non-human review if you're looking at existing data. The only difference with non-human and data and chart review is that like data chart review, you have access to PHI, which is patient, I thought it was protected, or I thought it was, okay, anyway, whatever PHI stands for, yeah, you have access to that, whereas like with non-human, it's all de-identified, so you don't know anything about the person. Expedited review is studies that are no more than minimal risk, but don't qualify for exemption. So like, for example, if you're like taking their blood samples through a finger stick, like something very, you know, minimal risk, not like too bad. And then full board review is like clinical trials when you like new medical treatments when you're having them like take a drug or whatever. They're more than minimal risk, and yeah. So this is the MyIRB website. So this is where you would go and submit. This is where you would like input all the information about your study and you would submit it. So this is a picture of the MRI one. But you can see, so where you would press edit study, and when you press edit study, then that's where you like put in all the information about the study, and then you can do a bunch of fun stuff. But the thing that I circled at the top, the orange thing, that basically shows like the status of your IRB study. So ours is there's changes requested by the IRB staff. But yes, and that's also where you can so yeah, so you can see all the fun information, like who the principal investigator is, study coordinators, funding types. So like the actual IRB, it's like, I don't know, John, if you've like gone through it yet, but like there's so many like little things like funding, like whether you're gonna be working with pregnant people or like old people or children, especially if you're working with children. So if you're working with children, we've experienced this, is like you have to it's like a whole process for it. But and going back to the assessment thing, because we're creating with Dream Teams, since we're creating these technologies and stuff, they have to like there's an office for like risk assessment. And so they have like the technology and everything, they have to go through that and they have to approve it before we can even do this. So yeah, and you're also given an IRB number, but that's pretty much it with that. So these are like the different statuses that you could have. So they'll say if it says like IRB software review or an exempt review, then that just means like you're just waiting. So like I was saying before, so the board meeting, so they meet like twice a month. And you have to submit everything before by a certain time for it to be considered, otherwise it'll be considered at the next one. And so like, that's what I was telling you is like, yeah, so it'll be like a day and you'll like potentially get a call, you might not get a call. And then if all goes well, then it's awaiting correspondence, that just means that they're doing like the paperwork or whatever, but that basically means that you're approved. So it's like, I'm sure the people who are on research, you know that it's like a waiting process, it's very slow. But once everything gets approved, it's fun, but it's just like, it takes time. So, besides submitting, so once you actually submit the IRB and you get approved, yay, then like, you can submit to IRB other things too. So, for example, so you might do a revision if, let's say, for example, like, let's say you're graduating and you won't be on the study team anymore, but we got new members. So if we change like the study team, you have to submit a revision. If you want to change, like, for example, like, you want to give a new survey or you want to change the survey, you have to do a revision. So any like, and no matter how minor it is, you have to submit a revision. You also have to report events. So if it's something super serious, like so a regulatory non-compliance is really bad. So it's like if you're conducting the study without IRB approval or not following the protocol or anything, that's really bad. You don't want to get that because if you get a regulatory non-compliance, then like they'll force you to stop your study. But for event reporting though, so for protocol deviation, so like things will happen, like some, like for example, like some participant might not fill out the survey all the way, or they might refuse to like fill out a survey, or something might happen. But that's okay, as long as it's not a major protocol deviation, that's okay. With any IRB studies, you have to keep like a log, like a deviation log, because eventually, on the next slide, you have to submit a continuing review. So a continuing review, so they basically check on you every year. They're like, are you still doing the study? Is everything going okay? How's everything going? So in that continuing review, you submit all the deviations you have, how enrollment is going, recruitment, all that fun stuff. If it's an expedited study, then you would just do a status report. And then once your study is complete, then you would do a study closure. So the picture just kind of shows like if your study is approved, you can see all like those are all the buttons basically that you would press to do all the other IRB submission things. So, like I said before, the IRB website is great. They have so many resources, and also really funny. So you have to like, before you start the IRB process, you should make sure that your study is not quality improvement and actual research. Because it was funny for the MRI study, we thought that it was novel and like, we were writing the IRB and everything, but then this document that we have here, it kind of like tells you like, okay, whether it's like quality improvement. So quality improvement basically is like improving like the process. That's kind of bad, but like, you know what I mean? Like, so improving like the overall patient quality, I guess, like the quality of like their experience at the hospital, I guess. But anyway, so we found out like that the MRI study was like a QIPR study. So QIPR is like the IRB website and process for quality improvement studies. But it's a whole different ballgame, but it's a lot easier than IRB. It's a lot less meticulous. So yeah, they have like all the IRB forms. They have a bunch of templates. Also on the research drive, we have a bunch of resources that you guys can use for the IRB. But yeah. So this is like, so the next couple slides are just like people who filled out my form and like are doing research outside of DTE. So feel free to like look at them, see if there's anything that you're interested in, you can just like keep sliding. There's everything from like BME to College of Medicine, CISE, pharmacy, chemical engineering. So yeah, but do you guys have any questions? It's like pretty, I don't know, I feel like it's straightforward. It's like a lot. It's like like when you actually start doing it, then you like learn all like how nuanced it is and like how like, but from the outside, it's like not that bad. It's just like a really lengthy process and really annoying. But once you like actually start doing it, it's really fun. Yeah, I guess.
If you filled out the form and you're here, feel free to talk about your research. Tell us a little bit about your project. John, I'm looking at you because your name's on the screen.
So I'm in the Scrabble lab. I'm also a chemical engineering major. I don't think it's applicable, but the lab is kind of DME oriented. The lab, it's a huge lab, but it's all based around silk fibrillin, and silk fibrillin is just like a protein that is from like silk pods from like silkworms or Bombyx mori. So we extract the fibrillin, which we just basically just boil the silk. Silk's composed of two things, sericin and fibrillin. We get rid of the sericin, get the fibrillin, and then from there we just try to use it for a variety of non-medical applications, generally therapeutic applications. So the project my team just finished, my PhD mentor, she was making silk fibrillin sponges. So she was dissolving silk in solution, freeze drying them, and then and then you basically just get a sponge made of silk fibrillin, and that's supposed to mimic the extracellular matrix of skeletal muscle tissue. And then we were seeding myoblasts in that sponge and then stretching them to determine how their tensile strength, how it compared to actual muscle tissue, and if moving them increases the differentiation of myoblasts. So in theory, that can be used therapeutically for like large muscle tears or like loss of muscle tissue, just as muscle.
Neurological disorders, developmental disorders being like connected to your gut microbiome. And we study like different viruses and parasites that can cause like really severe diarrhea in people who are immunocompromised and like how your body responds to the infection. And I study Cryptosporidium, so crypto is kind of cool name. It's a parasite that causes diarrhea, and the only drug we have to treat it cannot be used in immunocompromised people. So like people who need the drug, like we would all, most of us assuming you're like healthy, would just deal with it on your own. But the drug that we have that works can be given to some children or people who actually would struggle with the disease. So we're trying to come up with better ways of treating it.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Another way to get research is by applying to programs. So I did the SIP program at the NIH, And I work for the Center of Disease Control, with the conducted studies about epidemiology. And we tried to predict future epidemics. It was pretty cool. And then there's other programs. If you're a sophomore, you can apply to Amgen. Amgen is really, really, really cool. They will send you to other universities, and then you'll effectively do a conference in Cali to present the research that you've done. Multiple REUs that you can apply to as well on the NSF website. So like, there's multiple ways to go about it. I would also say that like the basis of almost all of this type, like trying to get into a lab, is massive cold emailing. Trust me, you will probably send 100 emails and you will probably get 10 answers back. And of those 10 answers, probably 8 of them are going to say no. So you need to email as much as possible. It's the only way to get, like, I mean, there's multiple other ways. Like you use the UFCR website, they have actual listings of labs that are open. You can go from department to department, and then you can email those faculty individually. But the point is that the only way that you'll get into contact is through emailing. And the best email format is to say that, hey, I read this paper of yours. I'm really interested in this concept. I heard your lab is investigating it. Here's my resume. I hope that I can help you in any sort of way. And from a research standpoint, if you're applying, try to get some data analysis skills, knowledge in R, really cool. Basically almost guarantees you a spot if you know all those data analyses like languages, but basically apply to as many, like you have to just send hundreds of emails. And then once you get one, you can leverage that into multiple other opportunities. And it's just like a feedback cycle. So that's basically.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking, so I agree. So as an example, I was looking for research in the Department of Chemical Engineering. And you wouldn't think there's that many research projects, and they're kind of